Some sounds you can never unhear. It's a strange thing, isn't it? You can spend a lifetime training your ears to find comfort in the world. The gentle coo of a morning dove at dawn, the whisper of wind through the tall pines, the familiar creak of the third step on the porch stairs. But one wrong sound, one sentence overheard at the wrong moment, can silence all of it. It can become the only thing you hear, an echo that plays in the hollow spaces of your heart forever. For me, that sound was the voice of my son Martin. And it wasn't the sound of love, or concern, or even mundane chatter. It was the sound of a thief in the night, except the thief was my own flesh and blood, and the night was a sun-drenched Tuesday afternoon. I was in my garden, the one my late husband Arthur and I had poured our souls into for 40 years. My knees were complaining, as they always did, but my hands were happy, buried deep in the cool, dark earth, thinning out the carrots. The sun was warm on my back, and the air smelled of soil and lavender. It was a perfect, ordinary moment. The kind of moment you think will stretch on forever, a comfortable blanket of routine. Martin was on the back porch, just above the garden. He'd arrived an hour earlier, full of his usual restless energy, kissing my cheek with a loud smack that was more for show than affection. He said he needed to make a few business calls and told me not to let him interrupt my puttering. He always called it puttering, as if my life's work was just a trivial hobby. I let it slide. I always let it slide. It was easier that way. He must have thought I had gone inside for my afternoon nap, a habit he relentlessly teased me about. But the sun felt too good to leave, so I stayed, half hidden by the climbing roses that snaked up the trellis. His voice carried on the still air, sharp and clear. At first I paid it no mind. It was just Martin's business voice, a clipped, overly confident tone he used when he was trying to sell something, or more often sell himself. But then I heard a name that made the trowel in my hand feel heavy as lead. Sterling. Mr. Sterling. Martin had mentioned him before, a big-shot developer who was buying up all the old family farms in the county and turning them into soulless housing tracts with names like Whispering Pines Estates, even after they'd cut down all the pines. No, no, absolutely, Robert, Martin was saying, and I could practically hear the slick, false smile in his voice. The paperwork is all but finalized, just a formality at this point. A pause. I pulled my hand from the dirt and wiped it on my apron, my body tensing. My mother's signature is on the transfer agreement. I'm looking at it right now. We're good to go. The wire transfer can proceed as soon as you get the signed copy. My signature. The words hung in the air, buzzing like angry hornets. My signature? I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't seen a contract, an agreement, or anything at all from a Mr. Robert Sterling. My mind scrambled, trying to find an innocent explanation. Had I signed something weeks ago and forgotten? No. This land, these 50 acres of rolling hills and ancient woods, was the only thing of value Arthur and I had ever owned. Signing it away was not something a woman like me would forget. Then came the next part. The part that shattered the perfect ordinary day into a million sharp-edged pieces. Oh, she's completely on board, Martin said, letting out a short, dismissive laugh. Well, she will be. I'm handling it. You know how the elderly get attached to things. I decided it was better to present it to her as a done deal. A smart business decision I made to secure her future. Less fuss that way. I'll smooth it over, don't you worry. She'll see the wisdom in it once she sees the number in her bank account. He was forging my name. My own son was standing on the porch of the house his father built, callously negotiating the sale of my entire world, using a forged signature as his key. He was planning to steal my home, my legacy, and then pat me on the head and tell me it was for my own good. The air in my lungs turned to ice. The warmth of the sun vanished. I felt a cold, creeping dread that started in my stomach and spread through my veins, making my fingers and toes go numb. He was selling Arthur's sanctuary. He was selling the 50 acres his father had spent a lifetime protecting, nurturing, and loving. And he was doing it with a lie, wrapped in the condescending package of my supposed frailty. He didn't know, of course. He couldn't possibly know. In his monumental arrogance, in his blind certainty that he could manage his elderly mother like a troublesome asset on a balance sheet, he had missed the most important detail. He had no idea that the day before, I had taken a bus into the city. He had no idea that I had sat in a small, quiet cafe across from his estranged daughter, my granddaughter Lily. And he certainly had no idea that in a stuffy lawyer's office, just a few hours later, I had legally, irrevocably, and immediately signed the entire 50-acre property over to her. The developer Martin was so eager to please, was about to send a massive wire transfer for a piece of land they thought they were buying from a sweet old lady. They were about to discover that the property now belonged to a brilliant, passionate, and fiercely conservation-minded environmental attorney, an attorney who had no intention of selling, an attorney who was my granddaughter. And at that moment, kneeling in the dirt, the sound of my son's betrayal still ringing in my ears, I felt a terrible, profound, and deeply satisfying silence settle over me. The game was already over. He just didn't know it yet. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I stayed kneeling in the garden for what felt like an eternity, the trowel still clutched in my hand, my knuckles white. The scent of the lavender was suddenly cloying, suffocating. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, a wild bird trapped in a cage. I could hear Martin's footsteps on the porch, the snap of his briefcase closing, the cheerful, oblivious whistle as he walked back to his car. He called out, "Bye, Mom, I'll call you tomorrow." I couldn't answer. The words were stones in my throat. I heard his expensive car roar to life and speed down the long gravel driveway, leaving a cloud of dust and betrayal in its wake. Only then did I allow myself to move. I pushed myself up, my knees groaning in protest, and stumbled into the house. The familiar cool of the kitchen did nothing to soothe the fire in my chest. I sank into Arthur's old armchair in the living room, the worn leather sighing as it took my weight. It was the chair he always sat in after a long day, his hands smelling of pine needles and damp earth, a contented exhaustion on his face. Now it just felt empty. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to stop the shaking, but it was no use. A single hot tear escaped and slid down my cheek, then another and another, until a quiet, ragged sob broke from my lips. It wasn't just the forgery, it wasn't just the land, it was the crushing weight of the revelation, the confirmation of a truth I had spent decades trying to ignore. To my son, I was not a person, I was an obstacle, a problem to be managed. My home, my life, my memories, they were just assets to be liquidated for his convenience. The casual cruelty of it was what broke me. Less fuss that way. As if my feelings, my connection to this place, were a mere inconvenience, a bit of dust to be swept under the rug. My mind, a tempest of shock and grief, began to drift back, searching for the headwaters of this polluted river. When did it start? When did my bright, loving little boy turn into this cold, calculating stranger? The memories came unbidden, sharp and painful as shards of glass. I remembered him at 20, a cocky grin on his face, handing me the keys to the brand-new sedan. Arthur and I had scraped and saved to buy him for his college graduation. The front end was crumpled like a tin can. "Don't worry, Mom," he'd said, slinging an arm around my shoulder. "It looks worse than it is. You and Dad can handle it, right? You've got that emergency fund." There was no apology, no remorse, just an absolute, unshakable certainty that we would fix it. And we did. Arthur was furious, but I had pleaded with him. He's just a boy, Arthur. He made a mistake. Arthur had looked at me then, a deep sadness in his eyes. Josephine, he'd said quietly, he's not a boy, and it wasn't a mistake. It was an expectation. I hadn't understood it then. Or perhaps I hadn't wanted to. A mother's love can be a powerful blindfold. A few years later, Martin came to me with a can't-miss business opportunity, some vague tech startup that was going to revolutionize the marketplace. He needed $20,000, just as a short-term loan. He'd pay it back in 6 months, with interest. He swore it. I took the money from our retirement savings, the account we were building to travel, to finally see the Grand Canyon. I told myself it was an investment in his future. The company folded in 4 months. The $20,000 was gone. When I gently asked him about it, he grew defensive, angry. These things are a risk, Mom. You have to be willing to lose to win big. Don't you want me to be successful? He twisted it masterfully until I felt like I was the one being unreasonable, as if my concern for our life savings was somehow an attack on his ambition. I never saw a penny of that money again, and I never mentioned it again. It was another thing I let slide. I had justified it all as a promise. Before Arthur passed, he'd made me take his hand. His grip was weak, but his eyes were clear. "Look after our boy, Josie," he'd whispered. "He's got a good heart, but his head is full of noise. He needs a steady hand." I had nodded, tears streaming down my face, and promised. "Always, Arthur. I'll always look after him." But I had confused looking after him with enabling him. I had provided a safety net so vast and so strong that he never learned the consequences of falling. My love had become his crutch, and he had used it to beat a path of entitlement straight through our lives. The armchair creaked as I shifted, the sound pulling me from the bitter past. The pain was still there, a raw, open wound, but something else was beginning to stir beneath it. A cold, hard anger, the kind of anger that doesn't scream and rage, but settles deep in your bones and solidifies into resolve. It was the memory of Arthur's true legacy that fanned the flame. This land. It wasn't just a property. It was a living, breathing testament to the man I loved. Arthur was a botanist by trade, but a naturalist by soul. He saw the world in the veins of a leaf, in the rings of a fallen tree. For 40 years we had walked these 50 acres together. He had taught me the names of every wild flower, the call of every bird. He'd shown me the patch of forest floor where the rare pink lady's slippers bloomed for 1 week every May. He'd spent a decade carefully cultivating a grove of American chestnut trees, a species all but wiped out, hoping to bring a piece of history back to life. This land was his heart, translated into soil and bark and birdsong. It was our promise to each other that we would be its stewards, its guardians, not its owners. And then there was Lily, my sweet, brilliant Lily. My thoughts turned to her, and the anger began to find its purpose. The memory of her last big fight with Martin was seared into my brain. It had been at my 70th birthday dinner. Lily, then in her final year of college, had announced with quiet pride that she'd been accepted into one of the top environmental law programs in the country, a full scholarship. I had been bursting with pride. She was following in her grandfather's footsteps, in spirit if not in profession. Martin's face had curdled. He'd been grooming her, he said, to join his real estate firm. "We build things, Lily," he'd said, his voice dripping with condescension. "We create value. What are you going to do with an environmental law degree? Sue people like me? Become some tree-hugging liability?" The argument had been brutal. He'd called her naive, a disappointment. He'd told her that if she chose this path, She was on her own. No more money, no more support. He was disowning her for not wanting to pave over paradise and put up a parking lot. Lily, with a strength that her father could never comprehend, had stood her ground. "I'd rather protect one of Grandpa's trees than sell 100 of your sterile condos, Dad," she'd said, her voice shaking but firm. "I'm sorry you see that as a betrayal." She had left that night, and Martin, true to his word, had cut her out of his life completely. He forbade me from speaking to her, from helping her. Of course, I defied him. I sent her what little I could from my pension, checks tucked inside birthday cards and letters full of the love her father denied her. It was our secret, a small act of rebellion that kept our bond alive. Sitting there, in the deepening shadows of the living room, it all became crystal clear. The path forward was no longer murky. It was a straight, clean line. Martin's betrayal wasn't just an attack on me, it was an attack on Arthur's memory, on Lily's future, and on the very soul of the land itself. He saw 50 acres of prime real estate. I saw Arthur's chestnut grove. He saw a multi-million-dollar deal. I saw the spot where Lily, as a little girl, had built a fort out of fallen branches. He saw an elderly mother to be managed. I saw the guardian of a sacred trust. The shaking stopped. My breathing evened out. The grief and shock receded, leaving behind something clean and pure and dangerous: purpose. Arthur had asked me to look after our boy, but he had also asked me to be a steward of this land. And I realized, in that moment, that those two promises were now in direct conflict. I had to choose. And for the first time in a very long time, the choice was not difficult at all. I was done letting things slide. I was done being the steady hand for a man who only wanted to use it to sign his own fraudulent documents. The noise in my own head, the chorus of doubt, and a mother's misplaced duty, finally went silent. And in that silence, I knew exactly what I had to do. In fact, I already had. A slow, unfamiliar smile touched my lips. It wasn't about revenge, I told myself. It was about justice. It was about honoring a promise. But as I thought of Martin's smug, confident voice on the phone, a small, dark part of me whispered back, perhaps it can be about both. The funny thing about a sudden crisis is that it can make you feel terribly sharp. All the fog of nostalgia and routine is burned away, and you see the landscape of your life with a stark, unforgiving clarity. My son's casual act of treachery wasn't an isolated storm. It was the culmination of a long, slow-moving weather front of entitlement I had been watching build for years. I hadn't been entirely naive. In the months leading up to that fateful phone call, the pressure from Martin had been steadily increasing. It was subtle at first, like the turn of a screw, almost unnoticeable. He would visit more often, which should have been a comfort, but instead felt like surveillance. He'd walk the property line with a thoughtful, appraising look on his face that had nothing to do with the beauty of the autumn foliage. He'd make comments during dinner. "You know, Mom, the property taxes on a place this size must be astronomical. Are you sure you're managing okay?" Or a friend of mine in the business, a developer, was saying land values out here have just gone through the roof. It's a seller's market. Just something to think about. He was planting seeds, testing the soil of my resolve. Each comment was a small probe, designed to make me feel that the land was not a sanctuary, but a burden. A financial liability that an old woman like me couldn't possibly handle. He was building his case, not for a jury, but for his own conscience. This slow-building dread had been the real catalyst. It had been a quiet hum of anxiety beneath the surface of my days. A few weeks before I overheard the call, I received a letter from the county. It was a formal notice of a zoning change application for the adjacent parcel of land. It was being rezoned from agricultural to high-density residential. The applicant was listed as Sterling Development, LLC. That was the first time I had seen the name in writing. It was no longer just a vague threat Martin had mentioned. It was a legal entity, with an address and a file number, and it was now my next-door neighbor. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that my 50 acres were next on their shopping list. That was when I decided I could no longer be passive. I couldn't just wait for the fox to get into the henhouse. I had to move the chickens. My first thought was Lily. She was the spiritual heir to this land, the only one who understood its true worth, which couldn't be measured in dollars per acre. But calling her felt like a monumental step. It meant formally acknowledging the failure of my own son. It meant choosing a side, decisively and forever. I finally found the courage one Tuesday morning. I took the early bus into the city, my heart a nervous flutter. We met at a small independent coffee shop near her office, a place with mismatched chairs and the rich smell of roasting beans. When Lily walked in, my breath caught in my throat. She was so much like Arthur. She had his thoughtful eyes and his quiet way of moving, as if she were always listening to the world around her. But she looked tired, the skin under her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. She was wearing a simple blazer and skirt that looked professional but well worn. I knew she was working for a shoestring nonprofit, fighting thankless battles against corporate polluters for next to nothing. Her father, in his gleaming office tower, probably spent more on lunch in a week than she earned in a month. "Grandma, what's wrong?" she asked immediately, her brow furrowed with concern as she slid into the booth across from me. I tried to smile, but my lips trembled. "Nothing's wrong, dear. I needed to see you." I started slowly, laying out my fears. I told her about Martin's increasingly pointed comments, about the developer buying the neighboring land, about the sick feeling in my stomach that he was planning something. I didn't accuse him of anything concrete yet. I just painted the picture for her. She listened intently, her coffee growing cold in her hands. Her legal mind was already at work. I could see it in her sharp, focused gaze. "He has no legal right to do anything, Grandma," she said, her voice firm. "The deed is in your name and yours alone. He can't sell it. He can't borrow against it. Not unless you sign a power of attorney, which you absolutely should not do." "I know, Lily. But he's persuasive. And I'm getting older. What if something happens to me? What if he tries to have me declared incompetent? He's capable of it. He sees this land as his birthright, his inheritance. He doesn't see it as mine to give." Lily reached across the table and took my hand. Her hand was strong, warm. "He won't. I won't let him." That was when I took the plunge. "I don't want to leave it to chance, Lily. I don't want it in a will. A will can be contested, dragged through probate for years. Martin has the money and the ruthlessness to do that. I want to give it to you. Now." She stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. "What?" "Grandma, no. I can't. That's your home. That's everything. It's Arthur's legacy," I corrected her gently. "And you are the only one who understands what that means. I'm not asking you to sell it. I'm asking you to protect it. It would be my greatest peace of mind to know it's in your hands, safe from the bulldozers." I told her my plan. A quit-claim deed. A simple, immediate transfer of title. I would retain the right to live in the house for the rest of my life, a life tenancy, but the ownership of the land itself would pass to her, effective immediately. She was hesitant, overwhelmed. She spoke of the tax implications, the responsibility. She worried about what it would do to our family, what was left of it. "This will be a declaration of war, Grandma," she warned. "The war has already been declared, my dear," I replied, my voice steady. "I'm just choosing my battlefield. And my general." Seeing my resolve, she finally tearfully agreed. That very afternoon, She took me to see a lawyer she knew. Not one of the slick, downtown firms Martin would use, but a man named David Anya, an elder law specialist, with a small, cluttered office above a bakery. He was a kind, patient man, with a bushy mustache and glasses perched on the end of his nose. He spoke to me, not at me. He explained the process in plain English, ensuring I understood every clause. He talked about the grantor me and the grantee Lily, and the legal concept of consideration, which in our case was listed as love and affection. He made sure I understood that once I signed, it was final. There was no going back. I understand completely, Mr. Anya, I said, my voice clear and strong. I looked at Lily, whose eyes were shining with unshed tears, a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. I picked up the pen. My hand was perfectly steady as I signed my name, the same name my son was planning to trace onto a fraudulent contract. It felt like the most honest signature of my life. Mr. Anya notarized the document with a heavy, satisfying stamp. Now, he said, looking at Lily over his glasses, the most important step. This deed is not legally binding against third-party claims until it is filed with the county clerk's office. You need to take this to the county records department and have it officially recorded. Do it first thing in the morning. Once it's stamped and filed, her ownership is a matter of public record. No one can dispute it. Lily clutched the folder containing the deed as if it were the crown jewels. I'll do it before I even go to the office, she promised. The next day she did exactly that. She was at the county clerk's office when it opened at 8 a.m. By 8:15, the quitclaim deed transferring ownership of Hollow Oak Farm, Block 7, Lot 4, from Josephine Gable to Lillian Gable, was officially recorded and time-stamped. It was done. The secret shield was in place. That evening, feeling the need for one more layer of reassurance, I called my oldest friend Beatrice. Beatrice had been a paralegal for 45 years before retiring and had more common sense and legal knowledge in her little finger than Martin had in his entire body. I told her everything, my voice low over the phone. She listened without interruption. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then she said, "Good for you, Josephine, good for you. Did I do the right thing, Bea? It feels so sneaky." "Sneaky?" she scoffed. "He was planning to forge your signature and sell your home out from under you. That's not business, that's grand larceny. You didn't start this fight. You just finished it before he even knew it had begun. You didn't just use foresight, Josie. You used his own arrogance against him. He was so sure you were a frail, clueless old woman that he never once considered you might be 10 steps ahead of him. He left you no choice. You didn't just protect the land, you protected yourself." Hearing her say it, hearing the righteous anger in her voice on my behalf, washed away my last lingering doubts. She was right. This wasn't a betrayal on my part. It was a checkmate, a quiet, perfectly legal, and devastatingly effective checkmate. And so when I overheard Martin's phone call the next day, the shock and pain were real, but underneath them was a bedrock of certainty. He was playing a game of checkers, moving his pieces with loud, boastful clicks. I was playing chess, and my final move had been made in silent, secret triumph the day before. All that was left was to wait for him to realize he'd been playing the wrong game all along. In the days that followed my discovery, I entered a state of strange, suspended calm. It felt like being in the eye of a hurricane. I knew the winds were raging just beyond my sight, and I knew they were heading my way, but in my small circle of awareness, everything was preternaturally still. I did nothing. I changed nothing. I went about my days with a deliberate, almost meditative slowness. I weeded the rest of the carrot patch. I baked an apple pie, filling the house with the comforting scent of cinnamon and cooked fruit. I sat on the porch swing in the evenings, a cup of chamomile tea warming my hands, and watched the fireflies begin their nightly dance. I was waiting. This quiet inaction was my first real move. I was letting Martin's plan proceed unimpeded. I was giving him enough rope, not to hang himself, but to tie himself into a knot of his own making. Every step he took, every confident email he sent to Mr. Sterling, was a step deeper into a trap he didn't know existed. My silence was my power. It was the silence that my dear Arthur had always valued, a stark contrast to the noise that filled Martin's world. He was all frantic calls and big promises. I was just a quiet old woman, sipping her tea. The first tremor from the outside world came 3 days later. It arrived in the form of my son's silver BMW crunching up the gravel driveway far faster than was safe. He burst out of the car, his phone pressed to his ear, his face a mask of frustration. He didn't even come to the door, but paced back and forth on the lawn, his voice a low, angry growl. I watched him from behind the living room curtains. He looked like a caged animal. After a few minutes he snapped his phone shut, took a deep breath to compose himself, and strode to the front door. When I opened it, he had plastered on a tense, overly bright smile. "Mom," he said, his voice a little too loud. "There you are, I was just in the neighborhood." A blatant lie. His office was 45 minutes away. "Martin, what a surprise," I said, my voice even and calm. I held the door open for him. "Would you like some pie? It's still warm." "No, no pie, thanks," he said, waving his hand dismissively as he walked past me into the house. He couldn't stand still, pacing the length of my Persian rug. "Listen, a very strange thing has happened. Just a bit of a snag, nothing to worry about. But Sterling's people, the developers I told you about, the ones who gave us that incredible appraisal. The ones you were on the phone with on the back porch the other day?" I asked, my voice laced with a delicate innocence. He flinched. Just for a second. "Yes, them. Well, their title company ran a search on the property standard procedure and they found some kind of clerical error down at the county office. It's a mess. They're saying the title isn't clean." He finally stopped pacing and looked at me, his eyes searching my face for something. "It's bizarre. They said there was a recent transfer of deed filed. Did you recently co-sign a loan for someone? Or maybe respond to one of those mail-in offers for a reverse mortgage? Sometimes those things can put a lien on the property without you realizing." He was feeding me excuses, hoping I would latch on to one. He was trying to lead me down a path where this was all a simple, fixable misunderstanding. The arrogance was breathtaking. It never even occurred to him that I might have done something intentionally. I took a slow sip of my tea, which I'd brought to the door with me. I let the silence stretch out, enjoying the growing panic in his eyes. "A clerical error? My, that does sound strange," I said thoughtfully. "And why were Mr. Sterling's people doing a title search on my land, dear? An appraisal doesn't usually require that." I had him. He sputtered, his carefully constructed composure cracking. "Well, we were just exploring options. For you, of course. To see what the land was worth. This deal, Mom, it's life-changing. We're talking 8 figures. Enough to put you in the most luxurious retirement community in the state, with millions left over." I was securing our future. Our family's future. "Our family," I repeated softly. "I see." He didn't catch the coldness in my tone. He was too wrapped up in his own fantasy, the one where he was the hero of this story. "Yes, so we need to clear this up. I'm going to have my lawyer look into it, get this supposed transfers nullified. It's probably just a filing mix-up, a wrong lot number or something, but it's holding up the whole deal." He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up. the first sign of his pristine facade beginning to crumble. "You do that, Martin," I said, taking another sip of tea. "You have your lawyer look right into it. I'm sure you'll get to the bottom of it." My calmness seemed to unnerve him more than an argument would have. He stared at me, a flicker of genuine suspicion finally dawning in his eyes. "You seem awfully calm about this, Mom." "I'm 81 years old, Martin," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "I've learned there are very few things in this world worth losing your composure over. A clerical error at the county office certainly isn't one of them. Now, are you sure you don't want a slice of that pie? It has a lovely cinnamon crust." He just stared at me, his jaw working silently. He was a shark that had just bitten into a steel cage, and he was only just beginning to realize his teeth were breaking. He left without another word, the forced smile gone, replaced by a look of profound and utter confusion. I closed the door behind him, leaned my back against it, and allowed myself a small, triumphant smile. The first wave had hit, and the house was still standing. The real storm was yet to come. Martin's confusion quickly metastasized into full-blown panic. The next 48 hours were a symphony of his unraveling, and I had a front-row seat. My phone, which usually sat silent for days, began to buzz with a frantic, insistent rhythm. First, there were the calls. He left a string of voicemails, each one more agitated than the last. I would listen to them in the evening, a strange little ritual, like listening to a radio drama. The first message was strained, but still attempting to sound in control. "Mom, it's me." My lawyer checked. "It's not a clerical error. Someone filed a quitclaim deed. He thinks it's likely fraudulent. Someone trying to scam you. Call me back as soon as you get this. We need to file a police report." The second message, a few hours later, had shed the pretense. "Mom, pick up the phone. My lawyer has a copy of the deed. The signature on it is yours, but the grantee is Lillian Gable. What is this? Is this some kind of joke? Did Lily trick you into signing something? Call me, now." By the next morning, the tone had shifted to pure distilled rage. "I know you can hear this. What have you done?" I spoke to Sterling. "The deal is on the verge of collapsing. Do you have any idea how much money you've just cost us? You went behind my back. With her. After everything I've done for you, for this family, you have to reverse it. Call your granddaughter and tell her to sign it back over. Today." I didn't answer a single call. I didn't respond to a single one of the dozens of text messages that followed. A barrage of accusations, threats, and finally, pathetic attempts at emotional blackmail. He wrote about all the sacrifices he'd made, how he was only ever thinking of my well-being. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. But the gas had run out. I was immune. His panic, however, wasn't contained to just me. Like a cornered animal, he started lashing out, trying to find allies, trying to build a coalition against the sudden, inexplicable madness of his mother. He tried to turn our small, tight-knit rural community against me. His first target was the Hendersons, our neighbors for over 30 years. Frank and Eleanor Henderson had been our closest friends. Frank and Arthur had built the fence between our properties together. Eleanor called me on the second day of Martin's siege. Her voice was full of a hesitant concern. "Josephine, it's Eleanor. Honey, are you all right? We just had the strangest visit from Martin." "Oh," I said, settling into my armchair. "What did my son have to say?" "Well, he was agitated," she said, choosing her words carefully. "He said you were not yourself, that you were making some rash decisions with the farm. He was worried you were being taken advantage of by that granddaughter of yours. He even used the word senile, Josephine." Frank just about threw him off the porch. A cold fury mixed with a deep, abiding gratitude washed over me. "Thank Frank for me, will you?" And no, Eleanor, I'm not senile. I am more myself than I have been in a very long time. I've simply made some arrangements for the property that honor Arthur's wishes. Martin disagrees with those arrangements because they don't involve a large check made out to him. There was a pause, and then Eleanor let out a sigh of relief. Oh, thank goodness. We thought as much. He always did have dollar signs in his eyes. That one, Frank said he looked like a man who just lost a winning lottery ticket. You just let us know if you need anything you hear. Anything at all. We're on your side. Martin's attempt to paint me as a confused old woman had backfired spectacularly. In our community, where reputations are built over decades of shared coffee and borrowed tools, his frantic greed looked exactly like what it was. He wasn't the concerned son, he was the thwarted predator. He had succeeded only in isolating himself. The final nail in his coffin came from the source of his desperate ambition, sterling development. I can only imagine the conversation, but Martin's final desperate voicemail painted a vivid picture. He must have received an official letter or a blistering call from their legal team. His voice on the message was no longer angry. It was thin, reedy, and laced with pure terror. Mom, please. You have to call me. Sterling's lawyers are involved. They're talking about filing a suit against me for fraudulent misrepresentation. They've spent a fortune on surveys and legal fees based on my assurances. The contract, the one I have with your signature, it's evidence. They could. Mom, this is serious. This could ruin me. Not just the deal. Personally. Please. Just call Lily. Tell her to fix this. I'll give her some of the money. A lot of it. Whatever she wants. Just fix it. That was the moment the power had fully and irrevocably shifted. He was no longer the one in control. He wasn't the deal maker, the smart businessman managing his elderly mother. He was a desperate man, staring into the abyss of legal and financial ruin, and he knew it. The forged document, which he had seen as his key to a quick fortune, had become a millstone around his neck. He had attempted to sell a property he didn't own, using a signature he had faked, to a powerful corporation that did not take kindly to being made a fool of. The quiet strength of my simple legal action had created a tidal wave, and it was now crashing down upon him, and him alone. I deleted the voicemail. The time for talking was over. The time for consequences had arrived. The confrontation, when it finally came, was not the screaming match I had braced myself for. It was something far worse, far more pathetic. He arrived at dusk, just as I was turning on the lamps in the living room. He didn't speed up the driveway this time. His car crawled, as if it were being dragged against its will. He didn't burst out. He sat in the driver's seat for a full 5 minutes, a dark silhouette in the fading light. When he finally emerged, he looked like a ghost of the man he was just a week ago. His expensive suit was rumpled, his face was pale and unshaven, and his eyes were hollowed out with sleeplessness and fear. He didn't knock. He just walked in, the front door having been left unlocked as it always was. He was holding a sheaf of papers in his hand, and he slapped them down on the coffee table. It was the sales contract. I could see the clumsy forged version of my signature at the bottom of the final page. "What have you done?" he asked. His voice wasn't a yell. It was a broken whisper. It was the voice of a man who knew the battle was lost, but had to play out the final humiliating scene. I didn't answer immediately. I gestured to the armchair opposite mine. Arthur's chair. "Sit down, Martin." He collapsed into it, the fight gone out of him. I remained standing, looking down at him. For the first time in his adult life, I felt taller. He gestured weakly at the papers. This was it. This was everything. For us. For our family. To take care of you. I had it all set up. A clean, simple deal. And you went behind my back and gave it all away to her?" The name was a venomous hiss. Finally I spoke. My voice was calm, devoid of the emotion that had been churning in me for days. It was as cold and clear as winter ice. "I didn't go behind your back, Martin. I was in my garden right below the porch when you made your call to Mr. Sterling. I heard everything. I watched the last bit of color drain from his face. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air. I heard you tell him you had my signature." I continued, my voice relentless. "I heard you laugh about how you would smooth it over with your elderly mother after the fact. I heard you discuss the wire transfer for a property you had no right to sell. I heard you, Martin. I heard you plan to steal my home." He flinched, as if I had physically struck him. The papers on the table suddenly seemed to radiate a toxic heat. He couldn't look at them. He couldn't look at me. "That signature," I said, pointing a steady finger at the document, "is a forgery. A clumsy one at that. You never could draw a straight line. But it doesn't even matter, does it? Because even if it were my own true signature, written in my own blood, that contract would be utterly worthless. It's a piece of paper promising to sell something I do not own." I let that sink in, watching him process the finality of it. "I haven't owned this land for over a week, Martin. As of 8:15 a.m. last Wednesday, every tree, every stone, every blade of grass belongs entirely and legally to my granddaughter. It belongs to Lily." As if on cue, the headlights of a car swept across the living room window, illuminating the profound shock on my son's face. A sensible, slightly muddy sedan pulled up behind his gleaming BMW, the engine cut, and a car door opened and closed with a solid, definitive thud. A moment later, Lily appeared in the doorway. She wasn't the tired, struggling young woman I had met in the coffee shop. She looked strong, confident. She was dressed in practical jeans and work boots, and she was holding a hammer and a small stack of professionally printed signs. She nodded once at me, a look of quiet solidarity passing between us. She didn't even spare a glance for her father, who was staring at her as if she were an apparition. "Grandma," she said, her voice clear and businesslike, "just wanted to let you know I'm going to post the new no trespassing signs along the main road. The survey markers are all clear. The trust documents are being finalized tomorrow." The visual confirmation, the calm assertion of her ownership, was the final blow. Martin crumpled. The last vestiges of his anger and arrogance dissolved, replaced by a raw, desperate panic. He turned to me, his eyes pleading. "Mom, you don't understand. My debts. I was counting on this. I leveraged everything. I told people the deal was certain." His words washed over me, and for the first time I felt nothing but a great aching pity. It was all about him. His debts, his deals, his reputation. He wasn't mourning the loss of a family home. He was mourning the loss of a get-out-of-jail-free card. "You made your choice, Martin," I said, my voice softening just a fraction, not with forgiveness, but with a deep and final sadness. "A long time ago, you chose money over family. You chose greed over respect. I simply chose to honor your father's legacy, and in doing so I chose his true heir." I looked over at Lily, who was now watching us, her expression unreadable. "I chose his granddaughter." Martin stared from my face to Lily's and back again, seeing not a mother and a daughter, but a unified, unbreakable wall. He had no hope of scaling. The fight was over. The vindication was complete. It was quiet. It was devastating. And it was absolute. Martin left that night. He didn't say goodbye. He simply stood up, a hollowed-out man, and walked out of the house, out of the life we had shared, without a backward glance. I haven't heard from him since, save for one final pathetic text message that arrived the next day. It was a long, rambling paragraph about a mother's duty and a son's love, a last-ditch effort to wield the guilt that had been his most effective tool for decades. I read the message, felt a brief flicker of an old familiar ache, and then I deleted it. It didn't work anymore. The strings had been cut. A few days later, a thick, intimidating envelope arrived by courier. It was from the legal department of Sterling Development, addressed to Martin, but sent to my address. It was a formal letter of intent to sue for fraudulent misrepresentation and recovery of costs. I set it on the hall table for him, in the unlikely event he ever returned. He never did. I later heard through the grapevine that he'd put his own house up for a quick sale and left town. Whether Sterling's lawyers ever caught up with him, I don't know. And I found, to my great surprise, that I didn't care. Lily, ever the professional, had her nonprofit's legal team draft a response. It was a thing of beauty, 2 crisp, polite paragraphs that clarified the legal chain of title for Hollow Oak Farm, complete with a copy of the time-stamped recorded deed. The letter concluded by gently suggesting that any further contact from Sterling Development regarding this property could be viewed as harassment, and that they themselves were now in possession of a contract that appeared to be evidence of an attempt at a fraudulent conveyance, a matter they would be happy to refer to the district attorney. We never heard from Sterling Development again, and then there was peace. A profound, quiet, and all-encompassing peace settled over the farm. The phone didn't ring with demands. No silver BMWs crunched up the driveway. It was just the wind, the birds, and the gentle rhythm of the seasons. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of relief, full of freedom. Lily and I have spent the last few months working together. We are not selling. We are healing. We walk the 50 acres just as Arthur and I used to. She, with her deep knowledge of conservation, has identified 3 different endangered species of wildflowers on the property that need protection. We've started the formal process of turning the entire farm into a conservation trust, a small protected nature preserve that will be named the Arthur Gable Memorial Sanctuary. We spend our weekends clearing invasive species and planning walking trails. I watch her work, her hands in the dirt, a look of intense, joyful concentration on her face, and I see him. I see my Arthur's spirit, his love for the living world, burning brightly in his granddaughter's eyes. We are healing the land from decades of neglect, and in doing so we are healing the broken branches of our own family tree. They say blood is thicker than water. I suppose that's true, in a way. But I've learned that some things are thicker than blood. Respect is thicker than blood. Integrity is thicker than blood. A promise made to a dying husband is thicker than blood. My son believed the land was his birthright, a commodity to be bought and sold. He never understood that it was a responsibility, a sacred trust. You can't put a price on a field of wildflowers at sunset, and you can't sell what was never truly yours to give away. Martin thought he was making a smart business decision, but he forgot the very first rule of any transaction. You have to know who you're dealing with. He looked at me and saw a frail old woman. He never once saw the guardian of the gate. I wonder if any of you have ever felt erased or underestimated by your own family. Have you ever had to make a choice between keeping the peace and keeping your soul? I would truly love to hear your story in the comments below. It helps to know you're not alone. And if you enjoyed seeing a little quiet justice served today, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss what happens next. There's a whole world to heal, and we're just getting started.